Nice cross member. Sure would be a shame if somebody was to. That is a great tool. I tell you what, on 110 volts that thing was handy. On 220 volts, this thing is an absolute game changer. Get yourself a cheap plasma cutter. This thing was only $300. You may be asking yourself, why did Chris just cut a perfectly good square tubing cross member off of that truck? Well, the reason is we're about to put a traction bar, triangulated ladder bar that goes right from here on the rear end forward to a shackle mounted on this cross member. And 2-inch square, 1/4-inch wall tube is fairly strong stuff, but that one was cut and bent in 4 places, welded back together. And it's actually not really strong enough for what we're going to do. There's going to be a lot of force pulling up and down in the center of this thing, right here where that shackle's going to hang. And so what I'm actually going to replace it with is, that's 2.5-inch outside diameter. It's a 2-inch inside diameter structural steel pipe. It's 1/4-inch wall. It's actually just a hint better than structural, than quarter wall. It's schedule 80. That is some rugged stuff right there. If my pipe bend will bend it, we're just going to put a bend at both ends of it so that it comes out of the same place this did, but goes up close to the floor and across and back down. That's going to get us the space to put the exhaust pipe underneath it and get that up out of the way. And it's going to give us a really strong cross member to mount to. We're going to gusset up the ends of it, and that should be good to go. So now I got to get this cleaned up, cut a couple of plates to triangle to put on this, weld that shut, and then we'll get the thing welded over it. All right, awesome. Alright, so I have the old cross member removed, and I've got some reinforcing plates welded in to attach the new one to. So now it's time to build a new cross member for this thing. And what I'm going to use for that, hi buddy, that cross member, we're going to use this, which is Schedule 80 structural steel pipe. It's a little over a 1/4 inch thick. It is insanely strong. And that's going to be the cross member. I'm going to try and put a nice little bend in both ends of it so we can get an arch to it of a couple inches that will get it up out of the way of the exhaust and the drive shaft and give us a nice flat spot to put the center link for our traction bars a little later. The other thing I want to do is I'm going to take a piece of angle iron. Find this scrap piece laying around here. Use it as a straight edge on my tubing. Just put a reference line that runs all the way down the part that I'm working on. This Sharpie doesn't quit on me. Because now I know if I point that up or down, I just put it in the same place. It means that both of my bends are going to go with the same direction relative to the center line of the tubing. Measure twice, cut once, measure 3 times, argue over it, second guess yourself. Time to see how badly I screwed up. Okay. A little wide, which is good because that's better than too narrow. Let's just put it up in here at an angle. I got my bend anywhere near where I want it. Yeah, that'll be nicely. Just gotta trim it for length. That should work nicely. As you can see, I can see the exhaust pipe through there, which means it'll go under that and be above the frame. And our traction bar is going to have a good place to mount right in the middle. Alright, now that we've got that cross member tacked in place, we need to make some drop brackets, a couple of nice tabs for the top of our shackle at the end of the traction bar to mount to. And now I'm going to tell you why we tack everything together and get most everything mocked up before I finish weld it. And the reason is because you might have to change something before you're done. Especially a job like this, I'm a little bit designing this on the fly. I'm using some other people's designs and combining them, but it's just kind of going together as I'm making it. Long story short, this needs to be higher because the shackle that goes between this and the end of the traction bar I'm building is going to be very low. It has to be about 5 or 6 inches long to accomplish getting the rod end at this end of it and this at the other. Which also means that the top link to go to the top of the truss on the rear end where it has to mount up would have to go from the link downwards to it. So there's two things wrong with that. If the front of the traction bar is mounted lower, it actually would cause the truck to squat more, which we're trying to not have happen. We need the triangle to go up to the top. We need the top link as level as we can possibly get it. Now the way I'm going to do that is to just knock this loose, rotate it back here, and put it on the back of the cross member, and then brace it off really well since it's no longer getting its force up and down. It's now going to get it sideways, but this is rugged shit. The way it's seated onto the pipe is very strong, and I'm going to put a gusset or two here and there. It'll be really rugged at the end. It's not going to have any issues breaking. So I'm going to knock that loose, grind this clean, bring it up, weld it back on, zap it, tack it back on. The way I figured that out is I put it down at ride height again by putting it down on jack stands on its axles to compress the springs, and discovered that the top of the rear end where I need it to, where it sits at ride height is about level with the bottom of the frame. So that's basically where I need the lower shackle end to be, and that'll be perfect if I put this up top here. This is super rugged. It's not going to have any problem taking a twisting force. I gusseted at the ends. I may even put a second gusset on the edge here. So it's plenty rugged for that. I just need to make sure that this is welded on really good, and then I'm going to plate the top of it completely, and then probably put a couple of little gussets underneath. So. Okay, so we've got our ears tacked in place. We'll gusset them up later on. It's time to make our shackle. Our shackle is going to consist of poly bushing and a weld sleeve that we had in here to space it. This piece is actually the end off a hydraulic cylinder welded to that, which this weld bung for the rod end fits into, and the rod end. Now it's not going to be this long. I'm going to shorten this, and I'm actually going to shorten this weld bung just a little bit so that it fits in here, and the thing ends up being just about the length of a regular spring shackle up under here. 2 inches shorter than it is now, and it's going to sit forward at a slight angle. It should all tuck up nicely behind the transfer case. Speaking of the transfer case, some of you who know what I'm doing here, maybe you've done it before, are asking why I didn't put these ears on the front where I could get a longer radius arm, a longer arm on my longer radius on the arm where it swings, because that makes for less angle change at the rear end. Just makes the system work better. The longer the arm could be, ideally it should be way the hell up here. The reason is because the transfer case on these trucks, to change them out, there's a shaft that goes all the way through the transfer case. You take off this little cover here and take a nut off, and then the whole transfer case comes off the back of the transmission. It has to slide back almost as far as this cross member. So that's why this cross member isn't farther forward, over the top of this brake maybe. It's where the old one was, and this is a compromise. I'm still going to have a 3-foot long arm. It'll be fine. It's longer than the radius of the springs, and it should work just fine. The shackle at the front gives it some back and forth movement. It should all work really well. So now I'm going to switch around, do a couple of cuts in the saw on a couple of these pieces, and radius this up so that it fits into this nicely, I think. Weld it up, and then we'll have our shackle, and then from the shackle we go to the mounts on the rear end, and from the mounts on the rear end then we just tubing in the middle of it, and we've got ourselves a traction bar. dull hole saw with some teeth missing. Piece of fish mouth tubing, just like that. Pipe, fish mouth pipe. Now, you'll see in a second why I did that. Here's why. Because, I gotta do a little grinding, but the idea is that this is gonna slide down over this, fit to the tubing, and give me a really nice well around a whole bunch of this tubing, plus it's gonna give this shackle a really nice tapered appearance. None of this. Sometime yesterday my camera battery died while I was recording this, and I'm not exactly sure how much of this I've got, but this is what I've got now for the shackle. Link, I guess I should call it. It's not really shackle, it's a link. Of course, there's a urethane bushing that goes in here. We go back in after we paint this up. This is the lower end of it. It's upside down right now. But if the camera didn't catch it, I don't think it did. I haven't looked yet. This is the piece that's machined to fit inside the weld on. That's welded to this piece, and then just to be extra stupid strong, I fish mouthed the piece of the right size tubing to go over it, drove that down over it, which I'll be welding to both. So it's, when that goes on there, the weld will be welded around that, and then I'll smooth everything down, make it look nice and tapered, and paint it up, and it should look really nice, I hope. Once this is finished, the next step is to put the mounting plates on the rear end, put the other ends of the link bars, and then make the link bars. And there's our finished shackle, or I guess we can call that a torque link. That's going to attach to the bottom of that Heim joint there, so attach to the traction bar. The top end hangs on the cross member, and that should work pretty good. Now that that upper tube is tacked in place and held with a bungee cord there to keep it level, pointed at the Heim joint. So now I have to fab the lower tube up and get that tacked in. The lower tube is going to be just a little bit more complicated because it's not going to be straight. A lot of these go straight from here to here, and what I'm going to do just for the fun of it is I'm going to come forward about a foot straight actually, and then bend it up to meet this so that it sits just in front of and just slightly lower than the pinion, the rear yoke on the drive shaft. So that if a log or a rock comes in and slams the middle of this thing, instead of hitting the drive shaft at the U-joint yoke, it'll hit this traction bar and deflect up over it. So figure if we're going to have something that hangs a little bit lower than the tube here, which is not ideal, then we might as well use it. And yes, we could have gone up above. This thing is sprung over. We could have done this all up above here. But then the bar would have had a weird angle down to the cross member, and it's way better to have this top bar wants to be close to level to keep this thing from squatting, as I understand the geometry of the system. So here we go. What I'm going to do is go ahead and bend the tubing that I have, the pipe for the bottom piece, about a foot out, and then I'm going to, let me check and see if a foot is what I really want. It angles up fairly sharply. So I don't even want to come forward a foot, actually. What I want to come forward is about maybe 10 inches. Yep, I'm going to come forward 10 inches to the center of my bend. Alright then. I just gave this the eyeball test. And it's perfect. So I guessed right on that then. Now we'll put a fish mouth on the end of it. And and then figure out how long it needs to be. I've got those all tacked up, so those back ends, the fish mouths are good. That'll work. But the front, I don't like the way this looks, then I'm going to slim it up. This needs to come up a little bit anyway, because these two bars are not parallel, and to make this look good, this needs to be parallel. I don't know if you can see that or not, but that bar tilts up. It's that much out of level. By the way, I have a tie-down strap right now holding the axle up to simulate this thing being at ride height. And this one angles slightly down. We need to come up to... So they're closer than I thought. So, but yeah, to get these parallel, I need to bring the lower one up. So yes, they're going to get shortened. Fish mouth, the ends of them, fit them together, make it look a little more sleek up there so that the tabs that I weld on to bolt to the heim joint aren't so huge. I don't want it to be big and chunky. This is coming out alright though. I think this will work. Okay, that's much more like it. I apologize that I didn't show you how I did that, but the camera battery died. So, now I've got the top tube slightly fish mouthed so it sinks into the bottom tube a little bit. They're really close to parallel, close enough anyway, it's not going to be noticeable into the truck. And I've got the bottom tube laying right where I want it. So the next step is to just make some mounting tabs for the front, and once those are tacked in place and I'm happy with the way everything works, then I can take the bar off, pull the bushings out of it, weld it up solid, weld the mounts to the rear end, weld the cross member and weld the tabs, paint everything and reassemble it. So with any luck, in another couple hours here, this thing will have its completed traction bar and I can move on to the rear axle bump stops. And some new spring mount plates. I'm going to get rid of these stock spring mount plates that originally mounted the shocks on the inside edge. They've got a shock stud, you can see. Since we sprung over this thing, they no longer need that, and they're ugly, and they're not very strong. They're only 1/4 inch thick, and they're bent. So I'm going to replace those at both ends. Yep, next step is to fab up some tabs. That's what I'm going to do now for this traction bar. Just get the front of it mounted to that link that I've got hanging off the cross member. So let's do that. This pipe is 2 inches wide out to the outside of the high misalignment spacers on this heim. It is 2 3/4. So we've got a 3/8 difference on both sides. So what I've done here is put a 3/8 plate on each side of the 2 inch. This is 1 3/4, so it leaves an 1/8 inch gap on each side, which is no biggie. We're going to fill that up top. We'll be able to weld all in here. That's why I welded these two pipes together before I put this on, because this is going to be covered. And now I just need to make a pair of tabs that I'm going to weld on, look just like these, that'll stick out from the top and far enough to put the hole in it, and then this thing will be ready to weld up. Alright, so the only thing that's missing now off of this for permanent welding. Hi Hugo, how you doing? Every time I start talking to the camera, he thinks I'm talking to him. Everybody? Alright. The only thing missing now is I'm going to put a diagonal brace from the corner here where it's bent up to this brace. I was going to do some sort of webbing in here and that'll take care of it. May or may not put a little gusset up in here. These even with a 6-cylinder, these make enough torque that I'm, hearing stories about people breaking the ends off these bars, which is part of the reason all this shit up here is 3/8. Everything looks like it's overbuilt, because overbuilt's better than underbuilt. Extra, 5 or 10 pounds under here isn't going to hurt a damn thing, and fit keeps it from breaking. or save some driveline part. Those drive shafts are $300 each. So they're more actually, they're almost $4. So, I mean, if just this piece being down here saves the lower knuckle from getting smashed on a rock, it was worth it. Okay, now it's time to push the heck out of this thing and do the actual welds on it, shoot some paint on it. And we're not going to put it back under the truck just yet. I'm going to set it aside. Onto some other things. It's being away otherwise. So I may set it up under there just so you can see it. I broke out a nail, of course. Okay, so the traction bar is essentially done now. Don't mind the horrible paint on it, it's just to keep it from rusting, and I still need to do some work on the cross member. But it's pretty well done. I think it came out pretty good. I think that's going to be plenty rugged enough. We've all got 3/8 plate, we got a nice big heavy 3/4 inch heim joint, and urethane bushings at all 3 contact points with the truck so that it shouldn't transmit any weird vibrations, and it's got plenty of room to flex. This heim joint's got high misalignment spacers in it, so I mean this thing can go 45 degrees, which that rear end will never go. And the only time that this will ever limit its travel is if this thing's flying through the air and the rear end's at full droop, because it never limits one side or the other from dropping, and that's what's most important when you're crawling, is that you can get one end to go up and the other one to go down to keep the tires on the ground. So this is a proven design. You can fight over it in the comments if you want. I hope you do. It's good for the, it's good for the channel. But please tell me what an idiot I am and how this isn't going to work, because it's going to work. So, whatever. We'll take it wheeling. We're going to put cameras under this truck. This is going to fix the problem with S-ing out the springs, along with getting some new bump stops in place. I'm going to block that light. It needs bump stops. So we're going to make some 1/2-inch plate, U-bolt plates, to give the bump stops a nice place to land, and put a nice set of urethane bump stops at this end, and fix the rear end, and then we should be good to go. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned. There'll be more to come.